Hi, so we're going to continue learning about how to pick your next move in a chess game. One of the most difficult things in a game is when you're looking at a board and there's no obvious moves. Your opponent hasn't hung a piece, you don't have a lawnmower mate, you can't just promote a queen or something like that. There's no real clear move what's next. But you don't want to just make a random move because that just gives your opponent the tempo and sometimes might even weaken your position. So we're looking at how you can find good tactical moves by learning different checkmate patterns. We've learned there's two types of moves. There are positional moves, which are always really good early in the game, especially when you're trying to develop your pieces, start controlling more of the board. In these positional moves, they're going to move pieces to better places where they're safer, or they attack more pieces, or they assist other pieces. Or they're gonna do that stuff that you do in the opening, keeping your king safe, developing your pieces. But tactical moves, that's where it gets fun. And so we know a few basic tactics like forks, pins, and skewers, and we know some of the basic checkmates: back rank mate, the lawnmower mate, and the kiss of death. So we're learning new checkmate patterns. So the first one we learned was the opera mate, where the bishop protects the rook on the edge of the board and the king's only square is cut off. And last time we learned this swallowtail mate, where a queen is right adjacent to a king. The queen is attacking all of these squares shown in red, but the only squares safe for the king are occupied by his own pieces. As long as those pieces aren't a knight, that is called the swallowtail's mate. And the queen does have to be protected, so you see a knight shown here. Well, now we're going to move on and we're going to learn about the dovetail mate. That's our next one. It's very similar to the swallowtail mate, but if we just rotate everything just a little bit, we're going to see the dovetail mate. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's a board where, remember, before the pieces were up and diagonal from the king. Now they're up and adjacent to the king. Well, if this queen moves to this position, that is checkmate. All right, you see how the queen is now attacking the king and is attacking these squares and this square. And the only squares not being attacked by the queen are blocked by black's own pieces. As long as those pieces aren't a knight, just like with swallowtail, as long as those pieces aren't knights, this is checkmate. And as long as there's no other piece that can take the queen, obviously. So let's take a look at some actual games that have occurred and see if you can find where we can get this dovetail mate in. Okay, take a look at this. It's white to move, but hopefully you see really quickly that black has a threat of checkmate on the board. He's got this battery with the bishop and the queen. And if the queen comes all the way down here to g2, that would be checkmate. Do you remember what name that checkmate is called? If you said kiss of death, you're right. That would be the kiss of death, where the queen is adjacent to the king on the edge of the board and is protected by one of her own pieces, and none of white's other pieces can take the queen. Okay, so remember, we're looking for that pattern we just saw, where the king is blocked up and to the side or down and to the side by his own pieces. Okay, so maybe you see, well, there's a lot of ways we might pull this off. There's a couple pieces here, so if we could put the queen here on b4, that would be checkmate, but there's no way to do that fast enough, is there? Because I can't just put the queen on b4, the king would take it. Okay, well, there's the queen and the pawn blocking off. Maybe if the queen came all the way up here to b6, but then actually the pawn on a7 and the king could take the queen. So those aren't going to work either. So see if you can find the solution to this one. You may want to pause your video, and in a couple seconds I'm going to go over it with you, okay? Alright, let's take a look. So we know that if we don't check the king on every turn, black is going to win. Okay? So I have to look for all my possible checks. Alright, there's queen to d4, which is a check, but it's not really good because both of black's pieces can take it. There's queen to b4, which we already said doesn't work, and queen to b5, which doesn't work. That leaves only one other place I can move the queen. that results in check, and that's queen to a3. Okay. Now notice black can't move here or here because the queen is attacking those spaces. There's no way for a piece to block the queen, and no piece that can capture the queen. So the black king has to run away. Now if the black king moves over to b5, hopefully you'd see that the rook would come over and you'd give a lawnmower mate, right? So b5's no good. So what if the king moves over here to d4? Okay. Do you see it now? Now the queen is able to move over to e3, and now we have our checkmate with these squares being attacked by the queen, and black king's only escape squares are blocked by his own pieces. Alright, so you see how we could use that pattern, recognizing, hey, the king is here and there's pieces set up diagonal to each other. If we can maneuver and force the king into a position where the queen can set right next to the king and be protected, we're in good shape. And so we knew that this square would work because the pawn on f2 is protecting the queen. Alright, let's look at one that's even a little tougher. Okay. So again, we are seeing we've got these pawns that are sitting here in diagonal positions. Alright. So if we could bring this king out to this square, then we could checkmate by putting the queen on this square. But that means we're going to have to clear out a lot of stuff. So let's see what we can do to make that happen. Alright. So remember, what we're trying to do is we're trying to draw the king out and put the queen on this square. There are other checkmates that are even a threat on the board. For example, if we can get rid of this pawn and this pawn, we could swing the rook over to h1, and that would be a checkmate as well. So let's see if we can try to work on both of those ideas at once. Both of them involve clearing out some of these pawns. Right? So if we come here, right? If black captures with the h pawn, and then we capture right back, there's nothing that black can do to stop rook to h1 and checkmate. Okay, so black can't do that. Black can't ignore the pawn, because if black doesn't capture the pawn comes to g6, and that's checkmate, right? So black has to capture here, right? Now if white captures here, again, if black recaptures, then we get our checkmate. So black still needs to protect this pawn. So black might move this pawn forward to give access to the rook. And then if white pushes, black would be forced to capture the pawn. White captures with check. Oh, now do you see it coming? The king has to capture the pawn, and then white delivers checkmate. Alright, so you may have noticed those weren't the only possible moves, but all the other moves still ended up leading to a very, very big advantage for white, if not a quicker checkmate. Okay, so here is our pattern. You've got the king that has two of its squares blocked off by non-knight pieces that are diagonal to each other and adjacent to the king. And then the queen is diagonal to the king, attacking all the other squares, and the queen is protected. Alright, so that right there is our dovetail mate. Hopefully you can start looking for this in a game. The dovetail mate and the swallowtail mate, these are some of my favorite mates to look for in a game, because it's so much fun trying to find a way to force the king into the right position, and then boom, you plop your queen down and they get checkmated and they never saw it coming. They didn't even realize what you're doing. So these are fun checkmate patterns. So see if you can find some opportunities to practice with these, look for them in a game, head over to ChessKid, do some puzzles, and get ready for the tournament here in a few minutes. Alright, see you next time.